Hey folks, in this video I want to introduce some of the syntax we need to rely on if we want to divide our programs into multiple files/modules. So what do we need to do? Consider first on the left, which is a small kind of program fragment. So I don't have this huge program here. I just have a little bit of things to work with. So this is my program fragment over here. What do we have? Well, up top I have a bunch of header files. That's pretty typical. Maybe I have some boilerplate code, and then I have some functions, and then I have a main, and then I have one of the functions being defined. Okay, so this is a sample file, and this is maybe a single one program that's all in one file, right? So this is before introducing modules. So what's going to happen? What we basically do is construct what we call a header file. So a header file is the specifications for some piece of code. Again, you can think of specifications as being something like an interface in a language like Java. So what does that code even look like? And we could just jump down here, right? At the bottom over here, right, we have a header file. Right? You can maybe see that there's a .h being mentioned in a comment over here, right? There's an underscore h over here. That h, right, stands for header file. We're looking at the source code for a header file. So what's going on here? This is sort of a refactoring of the code on the left-hand side. So what's been moved around? So there's actually a couple pieces here that maybe have been moved. So you can imagine, right, this is our original program. We want to basically restructure it to be into a module. We kind of have started to disassemble it. So we have a piece over here, which is actually ending up over here in this part over here, right? It's that, and then a second piece as well, which is this stdio. This as well gets moved down. So those two lines basically have been moved from that left-hand program to that right-hand, from that left-hand file to that right-hand file. We've broken it into pieces. So basically the idea is that we decided already that, hey, we want to break up this example program, maybe breaking that up into like a stack stuff and then console utilities, right? That would make sense. So here basically what we're doing is we've taken the parts of our program which are that console utility stuff, which is just something called flush. It's basically meant to flush out the keyboard buffer. And we've moved it to another file, to this other .h file. And so this is now a specification for this thing called utilities. So utilities is basically the name of a module, and what we're looking at on the right-hand side, that .h file, is that specification for that module. Now right now it's pretty straightforward because it only has one function. It only has that flush function in it. Obviously if we had more, this would be longer, but I want to start with something that's pretty straightforward. So this is our syntax here, right? We basically moved over our forward declaration and then any kind of header files we needed into this new file, this .h, right? We moved it over. Okay, so this is my header file. This is me kind of refactoring my code. So this is what a header file looks like. Now, a little bit more about the syntax here. We have some special lines. So you may notice I have basically the preprocessor doing some interesting stuff over here and over here. So we kind of already talked about the preprocessor a little bit. So the question maybe here is, what are these lines doing? So we're using here this common pattern which we call a header guard. So I have if not defined, define, then end if at the end. So how does this work? You can imagine the compiler is running and it starts parsing this file and goes top to bottom, right? So it's trying to figure out what to do. And then what it first sees, right, is if not defined, and it looks for this symbol here of utilities underscore h, and it sees to see whether it checks to see whether that symbol has already been encountered, right? Has anybody already defined it? Well, the first time through, when you compile this program, no one's defined it, so you're kind of good to go. You go ahead and the compiler will basically run the code inside this block here. So all this stuff inside will be run kind of the first time it ever sees this file, just because it doesn't know about this utilities underscore h symbol that exists. Okay, looking at the code, so that's kind of what the first line is doing. Then we go down to define utilities underscore h. Basically what that's doing is it's creating that symbol. So now that symbol is in existence, right? It does exist, okay? Okay, just think about that for a second, right? We'll come back to that. Then inside we get to our code. And the rest of it kind of is a typical program, right? We have our include, our forward declaration, just normal program stuff, not too much to worry about. And at the end we have, right, utilities underscore h, right? End if utilities underscore h, right? And that basically is matched, right? So these over here, right, at the outside, those are matched together, right? Those match up. Okay. So first time through, right, everything just works the way you'd expect it for normally the compiler working. But then actually if your compiler runs and encounters this file a second time, it will actually see, oh hey, I've actually already been through this once because this utilities underscore h will have been defined, right? So so you have that first statement there, right? If not defined this, then do this. The then, right, is everything inside of it. Well, then if it's not defined, right, your first step is to define it, right? The result of that is basically making sure this only ever occurs once, right? So if it's not defined, then define it, and then you do your stuff. And if you ever see this file again, right, you'll come to it and you'll be like, oh, hey, it's already defined, and you'll skip doing anything, right? The goal here, right, is we only want source files to ever be compiled once. For a couple reasons. First one is simply performance. Does it make sense to compile something more than once? Probably not. It's going to be the same. The second thing is to avoid kind of redeclaration errors, right? So we don't want to have our program think that there are different flushes because maybe somehow the compiler decided to compile this file multiple times. I don't want to see flush multiple times and think that there's multiple flushes out there. Really, there should just be one. Okay, so that's a redeclaration error. Okay, so that's my format here for a header file, right? So that's a header guard, right? Basically designed to make sure it only compiles once. Okay, so we're pretty good on our specification. What about our implementation? Again, some refactoring here. I have my example code from before, and I have basically this stuff over here that I want to factor out, right? So that's my little flush function. And so what I can do is I can think about creating this new file over here, and I guess I'll do it in a box maybe because it looks a little bit different than the other one. This is a new file. This is utilities.c. And this, for example, right, has just this flush function, right? So I basically took my code from here, I moved it over here. So I just moved that over, and then I have my header file over here, right, which is actually what I constructed on my previous page, right? That was my specification, right? So I've put together this module, right? On the previous slide, we talked about the header file, which is basically that specification for what this module contains, and here, right, in the implementation file, the .c file, it's just the actual code that actually does it, right? So it's the actual program code that we want. And so here, right, this is a little more straightforward than the header. There's no special header guide or anything you need to put in. I just put my functions, and then I make sure that I include that header function, right? I include that header file, right? The one that was defined for my module. It's basically said, hey, this is all the stuff that you need to make available. Other than that, it's relatively straightforward. One other side note here before I forget, when you include the header file you just built that explains what's supposed to be in your module, you need to use double quotes. So you can't use the arrows, you have to use double quotes. Arrows are for basically header files coming from the standard library. Double quotes are for header files coming from your custom directory. Alright, so that about does it for this video. We basically have gone through and shown, this is some basic formatting, right, for pulling out a header file, right, from a main file. In the next video, we'll talk a little bit about the compilation process and how this actually works on the inside.